All right. Welcome, everyone, to another Testing Tuesday. I'm David G. Bland. I'm the co-author of Testing Business Ideas. And what we're going to be discussing today is a topic that I find myself coaching teams through quite often, which is how to find your early adopters and how to even identify your early adopters. I find that we kind of skip that step sometimes, and we get the build and we start building, and then we realize, we didn't really define who we're building for. And there are kind of two schools of thought for that, right? One is we just build for everybody, and then we see who likes it, and then we kind of back our way into those subsegments, which is one way to do it. Normally, to do it that way, you're going to have to sort through a lot of noise, and you're going to have to find data about people, and you end up with subsegments anyway, because not everyone's going to love your thing. The other way that I prefer is more of a niche to win strategy, which is we're going to start with somebody very specific, and we're going to do something very targeted for them, like a painful problem that they're experiencing, or a job they're trying to do, or trying to create a gain for them. And so I find that when you start that way, you have at least clear signals. It doesn't mean you always choose the right one, but when you start going down that path and it's obvious that that's not your segment, you can back up and go down a different path for a segment. Sometimes people become so passionate about a very specific segment of folks that they find a different problem that they have, and they want to solve that instead of their initial problem that they thought they were going to solve. So it's very iterative, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through how I coach teams on this. And so this is more of like free flowing. We're going to talk for a little bit. I'm going to kind of present some stuff, and then we'll pause, and then we can do some Q&A and hang out as well, because I'm sure you all have testing stories as well and how to get to customers. Just a reminder, this is kind of a part of a bigger series of how I can help. So there's basically four ways. One is the book, which a lot of you already have, so thank you. The other is YouTube channel, which this will be uploaded to, and I have a bunch of other videos I kind of do just to help people out. And then we have the assumptions mapping course, which I created in the summer of last year. And that is really popular as well if you're looking more at a self-paced thing. And then we have our bigger programs that we do for companies, which are kind of like bigger overall programs building a culture of experimentation. So all that stuff is available if you need more help. All right, so let's jump in. First off, I want to talk a little bit about just early adopters in general, because I find that a lot of my clients have a hard time even defining who an early adopter is. And there's this model that I really like from Steve Blank, who wrote 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And, he was collaborating with Eric Ries early on, who wrote Lean Startup. And this idea of, an early adopter, I find is a little vague still. When I go into teams, they kind of have a hard time defining what is an early adopter? How would I even start to basically define that person or that segment? And so one of the ways I really like doing this is kind of using Steve's model, but I want to show you how it's been expanded, and I want to show you how it kind of becomes a very actionable thing. Because sometimes I feel like people look at these drawings and they're like, I don't know how to put that in action. And that's fair. But I want to kind of walk through how I put it in action anyway. So first off, I kind of think of it as almost like this pyramid. And I've simplified this over the years. I know Steve goes much more into detail. But I find some people just get lost when things get too complicated. So I'm always kind of trying to distill stuff down into something that's really like actionable that you can just do something with right away. So my hope is for you all today, you can just take this and run with it even after our session today. So first off, when you think about an early adopter, the way I kind of frame this, and it's sort of got problem framing that I like, which is, do they have the problem? Okay. So that's one way you can start defining an early adopter. They have the problem, right? There's observable evidence that they have a problem. Now, they might not always know that they have a problem, which is a challenge that we'll get into as far as how you test and how you get in front of people and everything. But you need observable evidence of a problem. It could be a problem you personally experience. That's fine. But eventually, you're going to have to find more people that have that problem if you're trying to build a sustainable thing. Right? You're going to find enough people like you that have the problem. And there are plenty of companies that are successful that have started that way. But there are also some that weren't so successful because, it was a very, very niche problem. The market was too small. And I think we always talk about this idea of product market fit, which I love that framing, by the way. But it is possible to fit your product into a market that's too small. And then you can never really grow. It's not viable enough. And it becomes kind of like this hobby thing you do. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but potentially it's not something you can keep sustaining, as a business anyway. So first off, do they have the problem? Next is, are they aware um, of the problem? So that is another piece of this, which is, okay, I have the problem, but I'm actually aware I have it as well. And so that little nuance can really throw a wrench into how do you get to your early adopters, right? So if you have to essentially um, educate them and make them aware, then that's a slightly different way to get to them versus, oh, they're already aware um, and they're already problem aware, or at least symptom aware of this. One of the case studies I have in the book is from a company called Topology, where they basically have this app that measures your face, and then they make glasses that are specific for your face. When they were doing a lot of their early stage discovery and trying to find their early adopters, they realized that people were symptom aware, but they didn't understand the problem, right? Their glasses like rubbed against their nose and things, but they just thought that's how glasses are, you know? And so they didn't realize that they weren't necessarily fit well for them. And so it was really interesting. You can kind of, it was back in the book. I think that was the pop-up store experiment or expanded pop-up store experiment where they were doing intercepts in San Francisco. But you can start to see, like, when you're starting to uncover people and do discovery, some people have a problem, but they're not necessarily aware of it, or they might not even be fully aware of what's causing their problem. Okay. And then finally, you want to get to a point where, you know, they're seeking a solution. Okay. So this is when essentially the problem is painful enough that they're actively seeking a solution to it, right? So when you think about going up this pyramid, right, when you talk about your early adopter, ideally you want somebody that has the problem, they're aware they have a problem, and then they're actively seeking a solution to that problem. Right? So this is one way I just start to coach teams on, okay, whether it's B2B or B2C or software, hardware, services, or whatever kind of company I'm working with. I'm trying to get them in this mode of thinking. How many people have this problem? Do we know that they have the problem? How many people are aware that they have the problem? And then how many people of them are actively seeking a solution to that problem? Now, when you look at that, it can change the way you go about testing with them and going and finding them, right? So, you know, up here, it's much more of, and I've written about this and I can link you some of this too. Up here, it's much more of a pull-based approach, right? So if you're looking for people that are already seeking, you try to find where they're seeking. You know, it might be like some of the stuff I've worked with in dentistry, for example. People would ask their dentist or they ask their dental assistant, right? And so you could find out, are their patients asking for a solution to a problem that they experience, right? They also might go on Google. Now, they probably shouldn't, but we do. And so you might be typing in how to solve that problem with your mouth on Google. And therefore, it's more of a pull-based solution where you're trying to basically pull them when they're seeking into your value proposition and test with them, right? And so sometimes that's a landing page, something that's something different. But if you get in front of them when they're seeking, basically you can get in front of them at that point of time. And therefore, they should be much more receptive to your solution if the value prop resonates, if it's a really good fit. Okay, but down here, it's kind of more of a push because basically, you're trying to get in front of them, and maybe they're not seeking a solution, or maybe it's not a painful enough problem, or maybe they don't even know they have the problem, and you have to build that awareness. So it's much more of kind of a push. And so when I think about, you know, a pull versus push, if you get these misaligned, you might have a very frustrating experience where you just feel like there's nobody that has this problem and I'm ready to give up. And I've seen this personally with my teams that I've coached, right? We started with trying to push and we realized, wow, nobody's signing up for our beta, or no one's signing up for our email list, and no one's interacting with our landing page. And we realized, oh, you know what? Let's just go for the people that are seeking a solution. And is anybody, you can do keyword, you know, trend analysis and see, is anyone searching for that thing that we've interviewed people about? It's like, oh yeah, there's 10,000 people searching for it right now. So let's get in front of them. And we've had very different experiences, because when you get in front of them, it's a smaller segment, right, of the whole group, but they're very receptive usually. And so you can see almost, you know, no conversion rates at the bottom of this, and you can see very high conversion rates at the top. We saw, you know, a recent team I wrote about, we saw about a 40% conversion rate on the poll, which is pretty high. And so, but this little break here between seeking and just aware is a big deal. And so when you think about your early adopter, you think about somebody that, oh, ideally they have the problem, they're aware, and they're actively seeking a solution. You can go even further than that, but I find it troublesome. So, for example, you could say, oh, they've had to build their own solution, and potentially they've thrown a bunch of money at that solution. I find that sometimes people that have built their own solution are not necessarily your early adopters because they fall in love with that solution, especially B2B. You go into a company, they've built their own solution, and then they don't want to let go of that solution, even if you come in with something better and cheaper, because they've built maybe a team or a department around that solution. They have a budget with that solution. And so you have to be careful how far up this pyramid you go. I like to stop about the seeking part because if you're looking for early adopters, there should be a good pool of people to test with at that stage. If you keep going up and you're looking for people that have, built their own solutions and everything, be aware that they may not end up being your early adopters. Okay, so I'm going to sketch out a bit more, and then we can jump into some Q&A and we can hang out. Okay, so this you've probably seen, or you've seen some variation of this. I've been talking about this for a while, but I want to talk about some other stuff that I've learned from folks like Justin Wilcox, who I've had the pleasure of hanging out with in the past. And I've seen variations of this that I've put into my coaching. So I'm only showing you stuff today that I actively use in my coaching with companies. So when you think about how are they different, when you think about, okay, so we talked about just even go to have, problem, aware, seeking. How is this, what does this look like in the big picture? Like, how are these people different from other segments and our strategy and everything? So one of the things I picked up from Justin, which was, how do we start educating people on, well, this is kind of your tip of the spear, but how do you get to other customers, other markets? What does that look like from a volume point of view? And I really like this mashup with Crossing the Chasm from Jeffrey Moore. And so basically kind of how this works is, some of you have probably seen variations of this, but basically you kind of have, and I'm not even going to go through a deep dive of Crossing the Chasm. There's plenty of material out there. But when you think about it, where people get tripped up is right here. They get tripped up and they run a Kickstarter or something, or an Indiegogo, and then they realize, oh, wait, not everyone's like those early adopters. What do I do? All right. And so what I've been doing with teams is helping them not only say, do you have observable evidence, like recent observable evidence that people have the problem they're aware and seeking solution? What does that look like in your strategy? What does that look like in your testing strategy? So when you think about this, I like doing this as like check marks and X's. You can do it however you want. But if you think about your early adopters, right, they have the problem, they're aware, and they're actively seeking a solution. Okay, that's all well and good. However, when you get to the majority, like early majority, late majority, you might run into different situations, right? So you might run into a situation where they have the problem and they're aware, but, well, they're not seeking. And that is going to change how you test with them, right? So maybe you have a small set of very passionate customers that you're testing with, but when you're branching out, right, you're running into a majority that maybe isn't actively seeking, right? They have it and they're aware. Maybe they were like the early adopters at one point and they just gave up and they stopped seeking, or maybe they never even bothered seeking. They didn't know what was possible, right? So you have to start unpacking that of, okay, if I go to majority, early majority, why aren't they seeking? And you start have to kind of figuring that out from a customer point of view. And when you get to the late majority, what tends to happen here is that they have the problem, right? But they aren't aware and they're not seeking, okay? And so that also changes your strategy in your testing, because now you're trying to go mass market. You found something that worked really well, and now you're trying to go test with others, and you're trying to go like beyond your early adopters and get to more people, but you're realizing they're a bit different, right? And so when Justin first shared this with me, I was like, this is brilliant. And it took me a while to figure out how to work it into my coaching, because sometimes I get really excited about something or a visual, and then I kind of stew on it a bit and say, okay, I don't want to just push this onto teams. Like, where would this become useful? And what I found is, when I'm working with teams that are having some success here with the early adopters, and then they get frustrated. So for example, let's say they ran a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, and they have a very passionate community there, because that's a one way to really engage with your community now for the crowdfunding is you can almost curate your early adopters, right? But then they go to mass market and it's a flop. Or I've worked with some companies where they had a passionate early adopter base and they took all their feedback as if it applied to the majority, and they overtuned their product for the majority. And then when they went to mass market, it was a flop, right? And all of these cases, people were stunned because they were receiving all this positive feedback from their early adopters. And they didn't understand that they were a very small segment of the overall market. And so this is something that I've just seen some of my teams get tripped up on. And so one of the ways I've been kind of coaching them behind the scenes is think about, yes, obviously have the problem, they're aware and they're seeking. That is amazing. So those folks should be your early adopters, because if they don't like what you're showing them, then you're going to have a really hard time convincing people that aren't seeking or aren't even aware, right? And you could even go as far as saying, well, there's some kind of anti-segment out here that these people are never going to be our customers because they don't have the problem and they're not aware and they're not seeking. So that end of the spectrum is also helpful to understand who isn't, your customer. But what I found more and more the challenge is that people who they identify the early adopters and they kind of have this council. Sometimes I hear them called councils or your early evangelists sometimes, but it's a group, right? You get to them, and then you overtune what you're working on to just meet every specific need they have. And what tends to happen is they're not represented of the majority of the market. All right. So one of the ways I've been trying to get ahead of this with my teams, because I've ran into it a few times and they're always stunned because they think everyone is just like the early adopter segment that we're testing with, is that they are somewhat different. And the way you go through this, you need to be thinking through, okay, well, how would I build awareness? Or how do I get to the people that aren't actively seeking and help them and help educate them, right? So this is something that I've really liked. And again, this is just kind of a mashup of kind of earlier Steve Blank's work that I pull from, but layered on top of another model that people already understand. Like most people have seen the bell curve, right? And they mostly understand when you start sketching it out. But this added nuance to it has really been sort of this light bulb moment for my teams, especially over the last couple of years, where they finally start to understand, oh, not only do we have to find people that have the problem and they're aware and they're seeking a solution, but we also have to keep in mind that as you go into mass market, there are some people that aren't going to be seeking and there are some people that aren't going to be aware. And how do we address that too when we finally get there? And not just over locally kind of optimize your MVP or your product for a very, very small majority. Okay, so it's a really tough balancing act. Other thing I want to just run by you before we jump into Q&A is I often kind of do this brainstorming with them as well. And I say, hey, where can you find your early adopters? Where do you think they are? And quite often the team has some ideas, but they're not sure. So what I do is very similar to this. I just brainstorm with them online and offline. And I do both anymore because increasingly, while a lot of people have an online presence, there are some segments where you're going to be more effective finding them offline. So for example, in the book, we talk about farmers. Specifically, we talk about corn farmers and cattle farmers and testing products with them. Well, guess what? They don't hang out on Google all day. They're on the farm, right? And so one of the ways to get in front of them is like a trade show. And so the team that is in the book, they took a brochure to a trade show and they handed out their value prop to farmers and got feedback with a call to action telling them to call this number or email this address to get more information, right? And so I've seen this enough where now Google and all these things aren't always going to be your go-to for finding your customers. Yes, they're still there. Yes, they're pretty common, but I like brainstorming with my teams. Where do you find people online and offline? And then let's dot vote on which ones we want to start with and then go test. And so quite often there's an element of being resilient here, where you're going to need to essentially keep brainstorming and testing different acquisition channels to your customer, which is kind of a little different than marketing. So, be mindful that traditional marketing is very much like when we talked about push and pull, it's a lot of pushing, right? But you're looking for your early adopters and getting them in to experience your value prop, which is a little bit more of a pull. And so I tend to even there's a lot of overlap, I tend to kind of distinguish between customer acquisition versus just marketing. Marketing is still great. I mean, I'm not necessarily bashing marketing, but when you think about how you do customer acquisition, it's defining, who your customer is. So putting some level of, okay, who are the people that have the problem, or where is seeking a solution to it? How are they different maybe from the majority? And where can I find them online and offline? All right. So if you're looking for different models to brainstorm with your teams and coach them through this, I think putting some sort of lightweight structure to what they're trying to do versus just like coming up with a bunch of personas and then trying to go find them. I tend to start with something like this, where I'm like, hey, do we have any observable evidence of people having the problem? Great. Do they know they have the problem? Great. Are they actively seeking a solution? Where are they seeking it? Can we get in front of them? And that's how I kind of approach it. Okay.